The Lost Craftsman, a medieval artisan's sleep journey. Picture yourself in the warm glow of a medieval workshop, where the gentle rhythm of hammer on anvil mingles with the soft scraping of chisel on stone, and the air carries the mingled scents of seasoned wood, heated metal, and pigments ground from precious stones. Tonight, we shall journey through the guild halls and artisan quarters of medieval Europe, following the forgotten stories of master craftsmen whose techniques died with them, apprentices who vanished before completing their training, and artisan secrets that were lost to time itself, hidden in workshop corners, buried with their creators, scattered by wars and plagues, yet destined to remain forever beyond the reach of future generations. Some possessed skills that seemed to border on magic. Others created works of such beauty that they were said to touch the divine. Still others discovered techniques that could have revolutionized their crafts, but were never shared. In this age of guilds and apprenticeships, when every craft was both livelihood and sacred calling, master artisans guarded their secrets jealously while passing down wisdom through generations of careful training. Each workshop was a universe unto itself, where raw materials were transformed through skill, patience, and often generations of accumulated knowledge into objects of beauty and utility. Stone became soaring cathedrals, metal became delicate jewelry, clay became vessels that would last for centuries, and pigments became paintings that captured not just images, but souls. But not all knowledge survived the passage of time. Let us now drift through their silent stories, as gentle as the whisper of silk thread through a loom or the soft hiss of molten glass being shaped by master hands. Part 1. The Stone Shapers. Imagine yourself walking through the shadowed nave of Chartres Cathedral in the year 1194, where the Great Fire has destroyed much of the original structure, but has also created unprecedented opportunities for artistic innovation. Among the master masons who converge on Chartres to rebuild this jewel of Gothic architecture stands Master Guillaume de Sens, whose reputation for carving stone that seems to breathe has spread throughout France. But Guillaume possesses more than mere technical skill. He has discovered what he calls the Song of Stone, a technique that allows him to determine the natural grain and stress patterns of each block by listening to the sound it makes when struck with different tools. This knowledge, passed down through 3 generations of his family, enables him to carve stone so delicately that his roses seem to sway in invisible breezes and his angels appear ready to take flight. The secret lies not just in understanding the stone, but in a preparation ritual that Guillaume performs before beginning each carving. He spends 3 days fasting and meditating before touching chisel to stone, during which time he claims to receive visions of the finished sculpture, existing within the raw block, waiting to be revealed rather than created. But Guillaume's greatest work, the portal sculpture that was to depict the entire story of salvation in stone, remains forever unfinished. Working late one winter evening in 1196, he suffers a stroke while carving the face of Christ, his chisel falling from nerveless fingers just as he was about to complete what he believed would be his masterpiece. The partially carved face, with one eye complete and filled with such compassion that viewers weep upon seeing it, becomes a pilgrimage destination in itself. But the technique that could have created similar miracles dies with Guillaume. His son, trained in the basics of stone carving, but never initiated into the deeper mysteries, attempts to complete his father's work, but lacks the spiritual preparation that gave Guillaume's carvings their otherworldly quality. The candlelight flickers across workshop walls as we drift to the scriptorium of Saint Denis, where Brother Anselm labors over illuminated manuscripts with techniques that transform mere ink and parchment into windows into paradise itself. Unlike other illuminators who work primarily with traditional pigments, Brother Anselm has discovered how to create colors that seem to glow with their own inner light, using methods that blend alchemy, prayer, and artistic skill in ways that his fellow monks view with suspicion. His blues capture the infinite depth of heaven. His golds reflect divine light so perfectly that manuscripts seem to emit their own radiance, and his reds pulse with the very essence of sacred love. The secret lies in his preparation of pigments, which begins not in the workshop, but in the monastery garden, where he grows certain flowers under carefully controlled conditions, harvesting them only at specific phases of the moon while reciting prayers that he claims were revealed to him in dreams. But Brother Anselm's methods require more than just technical knowledge. They demand a level of spiritual purity that he has achieved through decades of contemplative practice. He fasts for weeks before beginning each major illumination, spending his days in prayer and his nights in mystical meditation that gradually attunes his consciousness to what he calls the divine frequencies of color. His masterwork, an illuminated psalter commissioned for the King of France, contains pages so beautiful that courtiers claim they can hear angels singing when the book is opened, but the work is never completed. Brother Anselm, weakened by his extreme ascetic practices, falls ill with a fever that doctors cannot diagnose. In his delirium, he speaks of being called to illuminate the heavenly scriptures themselves, and on the night of his death, witnesses report seeing lights dancing around his cell and hearing the sound of otherworldly music. His unfinished psalter is carefully preserved, but attempts by other illuminators to complete it fail utterly. Their additions look crude and earthly compared to Anselm's transcendent artistry. The secret of his luminous pigments dies with him, leaving future generations to wonder how medieval artists achieved effects that seem impossible even with modern technology. Feel your breathing slow as we wander to the goldsmith workshops of Venice, where the convergence of Byzantine, Islamic, and Western traditions creates opportunities for innovations that push the boundaries of metalworking beyond anything previously imagined. Master Antonio Cellini, ancestor of the more famous Renaissance artist, has spent 30 years perfecting techniques that allow him to work gold as if it were clay, creating jewelry and religious objects of such delicate beauty that they seem to have been crafted by angels rather than human hands. His workshop, hidden in the maze of Venetian alleys, contains apparatus that he has designed himself, furnaces that burn at precisely controlled temperatures, tools that can shape metal at the molecular level, and chemical baths that can achieve surface effects unknown to other metalworkers. But Antonio's true innovation lies in his understanding of what he calls the memory of gold, his belief that precious metals retain traces of all the forces that shaped them, from their formation in ancient stars to their extraction from earthly mines. By learning to work with these inherent energies rather than against them, he can create objects that seem to pulse with life, jewelry that enhances the beauty and health of those who wear it, and religious artifacts that facilitate mystical experiences in those who pray before them. His masterpiece, a golden altar commissioned for the Basilica of San Marco, incorporates techniques that blend European metalworking with Islamic damascening and Byzantine cloisonné in ways that create surfaces which seem to shift and change as light moves across them. But Antonio guards his methods jealously, sharing them with no one except his daughter, Maria, whom he has trained from childhood to understand the spiritual dimensions of metalworking. When plague strikes Venice in 1348, both Antonio and Maria fall victim within days of each other. Antonio's workshop is sealed by nervous guild officials who suspect that his unusual techniques might involve sorcery, and when it is finally reopened years later, his tools and apparatus are found to have been mysteriously destroyed. His furnaces cracked beyond repair, his chemical formulas reduced to illegible stains, his delicate instruments twisted into unrecognizable shapes. Subsequent goldsmiths attempt to recreate his effects through conventional methods, but their work lacks the living quality that made Antonio's creation seem touched by the divine. The night deepens around us like a protective embrace as we drift to the cathedral workshops of Cologne, where Master Heinrich der Glasmaler creates stained glass windows that don't simply depict sacred scenes, but seem to make the very air sacred through their presence. Heinrich's technique goes far beyond the conventional methods of his time. While other glaziers content themselves with painting details on colored glass, Heinrich has discovered how to embed spiritual intentions directly into the glass itself during the firing process. He begins each window by spending weeks in meditation and prayer, allowing the intended design to take shape not just in his mind but in what he calls his spiritual vision. Then, working only during certain astrological conditions, and while maintaining a state of contemplative prayer, he creates glass that seems to transform ordinary sunlight into something approaching divine illumination. His windows don't simply show biblical scenes. They create atmospheric conditions that help viewers experience the spiritual realities that the images represent. The window depicting the Annunciation fills viewers with a sense of divine presence so powerful that many report mystical experiences while praying before it. The crucifixion window creates an atmosphere of such profound compassion that hardened warriors have been known to weep uncontrollably in its presence. But Heinrich's methods require not just technical skill, but spiritual development that he has achieved through decades of mystical practice. He follows a strict regimen of fasting, prayer, and meditation that gradually attunes his consciousness to what he believes are the spiritual frequencies of light itself. His workshop becomes a place of pilgrimage, with visitors coming not just to commission windows, but to experience the transformative atmosphere that Heinrich's spiritual practices have created. However, his techniques prove impossible to teach to conventional apprentices, who lack the spiritual preparation necessary to work with glass in the way Heinrich has developed. When Heinrich dies peacefully while praying before his greatest creation, a rose window that seems to contain all the colors of heaven, his methods die with him. The church authorities, uncomfortable with techniques that seem to border on mysticism, order his workshop closed and his notes destroyed. Future glaziers study his surviving windows with awe, but their attempts to recreate his effects produce only conventional stained glass that, while beautiful, lacks the transformative power that made Heinrich's work legendary throughout medieval Europe. As the castle bells toll across sleeping cities, we find ourselves in the textile workshops of Flanders, where the finest cloth in Europe is woven by artisans whose skills represent generations of accumulated knowledge. In the city of Bruges, Meesteres Margaretha van der Meer oversees a workshop that produces tapestries of such beauty and complexity that they are sought after by royalty throughout the known world. But Margaretha possesses more than mere technical expertise. She has developed what she calls thread meditation, a spiritual practice that allows her to weave not just images but intentions and blessings directly into the fabric itself. Her tapestries don't simply depict scenes from courtly life or biblical narratives. They create environments that influence the emotional and spiritual states of those who live with them. A tapestry depicting a garden scene brings peace and healing to sick rooms, while her hunting scenes inspire courage and vigor in those who view them regularly. The secret lies in Margaretha's preparation process, which begins months before the actual weaving. She personally oversees the entire production process, from the selection of sheep whose wool will be used to the harvesting of plants for natural dyes. Each step is performed according to a complex calendar that takes into account not just practical considerations, but astrological influences and lunar cycles. The wool is cleaned and prepared during waxing moons to encourage growth and strength, while dyeing takes place during specific planetary alignments that Margaretha believes enhance the spiritual properties of different colors. But the most crucial element is Margaretha's state of consciousness while weaving. She begins each session with an hour of contemplative prayer, gradually entering a meditative state in which she claims to receive guidance about how each thread should be placed. Working in this altered consciousness, she can weave for 12 hours without fatigue, creating patterns of such complexity that mathematical analysis wouldn't be developed for centuries. Her masterwork, a series of tapestries depicting the entire history of salvation, requires 7 years to complete and contains hidden symbolic elements that create different meanings when viewed from different angles or in different lighting conditions. But Margaretha's techniques prove impossible to transmit through conventional apprenticeship. The spiritual preparation requires a level of dedication that few are willing to undertake, and the meditative consciousness necessary for the actual weaving can only be achieved through years of contemplative practice. When Margareta dies peacefully at her loom while working on what she claims will be her final tapestry, a depiction of the New Jerusalem that she says has been revealed to her in visions, her workshop attempts to continue her methods, but gradually reverts to conventional techniques. The partially completed tapestry, showing the heavenly city in such detail that viewers claim they can almost hear celestial music, becomes a pilgrimage destination, but the secret of creating such transcendent textiles dies with its creator. The Abbey bell tolls through morning mist as we visit the metalworking shops of Milan, where the greatest armorers in Europe create protection that serves not just physical but spiritual purposes. Master Giovanni da Milano has spent his life perfecting techniques that transform the brutal business of war into something approaching sacred art. His armor doesn't simply protect the body, it enhances the courage, honor, and spiritual strength of those who wear it. Knights report that Giovanni's armor makes them feel invincible, not through mere psychological effect, but through some quality inherent in the metal itself. The secret lies in Giovanni's understanding of what he calls the soul of steel, his belief that metals, like living beings, can be imbued with spiritual qualities through proper treatment. His process begins with the selection of iron ore, which he personally oversees at remote mountain mines, choosing only metal that has been formed under specific geological conditions. The ore is then smelted during carefully calculated astrological conditions, with Giovanni maintaining a state of prayer and meditation throughout the entire process. But the true innovation comes in his tempering techniques, which involve not just heat and cooling, but spiritual practices that Giovanni claims align the molecular structure of the steel with cosmic harmonies. Each piece of armor is consecrated through rituals that combine Christian prayer with older traditions that Giovanni learned from a mysterious smith who claimed to possess knowledge dating back to Roman times. The finished armor bears no visible ornamentation, but knights who wear it report an almost supernatural enhancement of their physical and spiritual capabilities. Giovanni's masterpiece, a complete suit of armor commissioned for a Crusader knight, takes 3 years to complete and incorporates techniques that push his art to its absolute limits. The armor is said to be so perfectly crafted that it weighs almost nothing, despite providing complete protection, and so spiritually potent that its wearer is said to have survived battles that should have been impossible to survive. But Giovanni's methods require not just technical knowledge, but spiritual development that he has achieved through decades of contemplative smithing. He treats his forge as a sacred space, beginning each day with prayers and ending with meditation. His workshop becomes a place of pilgrimage for knights seeking armor that will protect both body and soul. However, when Giovanni attempts to pass on his knowledge to his son, the young man proves unable to achieve the spiritual state necessary for the advanced techniques. The technical aspects can be learned, but the transformative consciousness that gives Giovanni's work its legendary properties remains elusive. When Giovanni dies in his workshop while forging what he claims will be his final creation, a sword that he says will be worthy of the Archangel Michael himself, his methods die with him. The partially completed sword, whose blade seems to emit its own light and whose very presence makes viewers feel both awed and protected, is carefully preserved in the Cathedral of Milan, but the techniques that could have created similar wonders are lost forever. Feel your body growing heavy as we journey to the pottery workshops of Islamic Spain, where the last Muslim artisans working under Christian rule preserve techniques that represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. In the city of Toledo, Master Yusuf ibn Hakim maintains a workshop that produces ceramics of such beauty and spiritual power that they are sought after by Christian nobles despite religious tensions. Yusuf's pottery doesn't simply serve practical purposes. His vessels seem to enhance the flavor of food and wine. His decorative pieces create atmospheres of peace and contemplation, and his religious artifacts facilitate mystical experiences for those who use them in prayer. The secret lies in Yusuf's understanding of what Islamic philosophers call the mathematics of beauty, geometric principles that he believes reflect the underlying structure of creation itself. His designs incorporate complex mathematical relationships that create visual harmonies so perfect they seem to resonate with the observer's soul. But Yusuf's techniques go beyond mere geometric decoration. He has developed methods of clay preparation that involve not just technical processes, but spiritual practices derived from Sufi mysticism. The clay is mixed while he recites prayers and mathematical formulas that he believes align the material with cosmic harmonies. The firing process takes place during specific astrological conditions, with Yusuf maintaining a state of contemplative prayer throughout the days-long process. His workshop becomes a place where Christian and Islamic spiritual traditions meet and merge, with Christian nobles commissioning pieces that incorporate both geometric Islamic patterns and Christian symbolic elements. Yusuf's masterwork, a set of ceramic tiles commissioned for a private chapel, incorporates both traditions so seamlessly that viewers report experiencing a sense of universal spiritual truth that transcends religious boundaries. But Yusuf's position becomes increasingly precarious as religious tolerance in Spain decreases. When the Inquisition begins investigating reports of Islamic practices in Christian territories, Yusuf is forced to choose between abandoning his techniques and fleeing his homeland. He chooses exile, but dies during the dangerous journey to North Africa, taking with him not just his own knowledge, but centuries of accumulated Islamic ceramic techniques. His workshop is sealed by church authorities and later converted to other uses, while his remaining pottery becomes highly prized by collectors who recognize its extraordinary quality but lack any understanding of the spiritual and mathematical principles that made such beauty possible. The hours pass like whispered prayers as we drift to the manuscript workshops of Ireland, where Celtic scribes preserve not just the Christian learning that is spreading throughout Europe, but also the ancient wisdom of their pre-Christian ancestors. Brother Columba of Iona, working in a scriptorium that overlooks the wild Atlantic, has spent his life developing techniques for creating manuscripts that serve not just as repositories of information, but as sacred objects that facilitate mystical experiences. His illuminated Gospels don't simply contain the words of Scripture. They create visual environments that help readers experience the spiritual realities that the text describes. The secret lies in Brother Columba's synthesis of Christian spirituality with ancient Celtic understanding of the sacred power of symbols and patterns. His illuminations incorporate the spirals, knots, and interlacing patterns that his ancestors believed could induce altered states of consciousness, but he has adapted these techniques to serve Christian purposes. Working in a state of prayer and fasting that can last for weeks, he creates pages that seem to pulse with life, where the very act of reading becomes a form of meditation. His use of color goes far beyond conventional decoration. He has developed techniques for creating pigments that seem to change hue depending on the spiritual state of the viewer. Blues that deepen during contemplation, golds that brighten during prayer, reds that warm the heart during readings about divine love. But Brother Columba's methods require more than artistic skill. They demand a spiritual development that combines Christian mysticism with older Celtic traditions of consciousness alteration. He spends months in contemplative preparation before beginning each major work, during which time he claims to receive visions of how the finished manuscript should appear. His workshop becomes a place of pilgrimage for scholars and mystics who seek not just copies of texts, but transformative spiritual experiences. However, when Viking raids begin threatening the Irish monasteries, Brother Columba's work is interrupted by the need to hide the monastery's treasures. His final manuscript, a gospel book that he claims contains the complete visual representation of divine love, is hidden so well that it is never found again. Brother Columba himself disappears during a particularly severe raid, and with him dies not just his personal techniques, but a synthesis of Christian and Celtic spirituality that represented centuries of accumulated wisdom. Later, scribes attempt to continue his work using conventional methods, but their illuminations, while beautiful, lack the transformative power that made Brother Columba's manuscripts legendary throughout the Celtic world. Part 3. The Master Builders and Final Mysteries. Your breathing has found its natural rhythm now, slow and deep, as we drift to the cathedral workshops of Amiens, where Master Robert de Luzarcus oversees the construction of what will become one of the greatest achievements of Gothic architecture. But Robert possesses knowledge that goes far beyond conventional building techniques. He has discovered what he calls the sacred mathematics of stone, principles that allow him to create structures that don't simply enclose space, but transform it into something approaching the sacred geometry of heaven itself. His cathedral doesn't just provide a place for worship. It creates acoustic and visual conditions that facilitate mystical experiences for all who enter. The secret lies in Robert's understanding of the relationship between mathematical proportion, musical harmony, and spiritual consciousness. Working with concepts that won't be fully understood for centuries, he designs his cathedral according to geometric principles that create resonances between the physical structure and what he believes are the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. Every arch, every column, every intersection of stone has been calculated not just for structural stability, but for its contribution to the building's overall harmonic properties. The cathedral becomes a kind of massive musical instrument, where the movement of air, the quality of light, and even the prayers of the faithful combine to create an atmosphere of transcendent beauty. But Robert's techniques require not just mathematical knowledge, but spiritual insight that he has developed through decades of contemplative study. He treats architecture as a form of applied theology, believing that properly designed buildings can serve as instruments for raising human consciousness toward divine contemplation. His workshop becomes a school for sacred architecture, where master builders from throughout Europe come to learn not just construction techniques, but the spiritual principles that guide their application. However, Robert's methods prove difficult to transmit to conventional students who can learn the mathematical formulas but struggle to understand the spiritual vision that gives them meaning. When Robert dies while overseeing the final placement of the cathedral's rose window, a design so complex that its completion requires mathematical calculations that push medieval knowledge to its limits, his techniques die with him. The cathedral stands as a testament to his genius. Its proportions so perfect that visitors throughout the centuries report feeling transformed simply by being in its presence, but the principles that could have guided similar constructions are lost forever. Future architects study Amiens with awe, measuring its proportions and analyzing its structure, but their attempts to recreate its spiritual effects produce only conventional buildings that, while impressive, lack the transformative power that makes Amiens one of the most sacred spaces in Christendom. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peaceful rest as we visit the workshops of Murano, where Venetian glassmakers create objects of such beauty and technical perfection that they seem to capture light itself and transform it into solid form. Master Angelo Baraviere, working in techniques that his family has guarded for generations, produces glass that doesn't simply contain and reflect light, but seems to generate its own inner radiance. His goblets make wine taste like nectar. His windows turn ordinary sunlight into something approaching divine illumination, and his mirrors reflect not just physical appearance but seem to reveal the soul of whoever looks into them. The secret lies in Angelo's understanding of what he calls the marriage of fire and sand, techniques that work with the molecular structure of glass to create effects that seem impossible by conventional standards. His methods begin with the selection of sand, which he personally oversees at remote beaches where the quality of silica meets his exacting standards. The sand is then purified through processes that involve not just chemical treatment, but spiritual practices that Angelo claims align the material with cosmic forces. But the true innovation comes in Angelo's firing techniques, which involve precise control of temperature and atmosphere that can only be achieved through years of experience working with forces that exist at the boundary between matter and energy. Working in a state of meditation that allows him to sense the exact moment when the glass achieves perfect molecular alignment. Angelo can create effects that seem to violate the laws of physics: glass that is stronger than steel yet lighter than wood, transparent surfaces that seem to extend infinitely into otherworldly dimensions, colors that change depending on the emotional state of the observer. His masterwork, a complete chapel made entirely of glass commissioned for a Venetian palace, takes 7 years to complete and incorporates techniques that represent the culmination of centuries of accumulated glassmaking knowledge. The chapel creates an environment where prayer becomes a visual as well as spiritual experience, with light moving through the glass in patterns that seem to respond to the thoughts and feelings of those within. But Angelo's methods require not just technical knowledge, but spiritual development that he has achieved through decades of working with materials at the edge of their possibilities. His workshop becomes a place of pilgrimage for artists and craftsmen who seek to understand not just glassmaking, but the spiritual dimensions of working with matter and energy. However, when Angelo attempts to pass on his knowledge to his sons, they prove unable to achieve the meditative state necessary for the most advanced techniques. The technical aspects can be learned, but the consciousness that allows Angelo to work with glass as if it were a living material remains beyond their grasp. When Angelo dies peacefully while working on what he claims will be his final creation, a single goblet that he says will contain all the beauty he has ever created, his methods die with him. The goblet, never completed but containing glass of such extraordinary beauty that viewers claim they can see visions in its depths, is carefully preserved, but the techniques that could have created similar wonders are lost to future generations. In the quiet hours before dawn, we find ourselves in the scriptorium of the Abbey of St. Martin at Tours, where Brother Alcuin the Illuminator creates manuscripts that don't simply preserve knowledge, but seem to make the act of reading itself a mystical experience. Working with techniques that blend artistic skill with deep contemplative practice, Brother Alcuin produces texts that transform the simple act of studying into something approaching direct communion with divine wisdom. His manuscripts don't just contain information, they create cognitive and spiritual conditions that enhance the reader's ability to understand and internalize the knowledge they contain. The secret lies in Brother Alcuin's understanding of what medieval scholars called the correspondence between the outer and inner word, his belief that properly designed visual elements can create resonances with the reader's consciousness that facilitate deeper levels of comprehension. His illuminations incorporate symbolic elements that work on both conscious and unconscious levels, creating what he calls visual prayers that align the reader's mind with the spiritual content of the text. But Brother Alcuin's techniques go beyond mere decoration. He has developed methods of manuscript preparation that involve not just technical processes, but spiritual practices that he believes imbue the very parchment and ink with sacred properties. Working only during certain lunar phases, and while maintaining a state of contemplative prayer, he creates books that seem to emanate wisdom even when closed. His workshop becomes a place where the boundaries between art, scholarship, and mysticism dissolve, with visiting scholars reporting that studying Brother Alcuin's manuscripts enhances not just their knowledge but their spiritual development. However, his methods prove impossible to transmit through conventional apprenticeship. The spiritual preparation requires a level of dedication that few are willing to undertake, and the consciousness necessary for creating truly transformative manuscripts can only be achieved through years of contemplative practice. When Brother Alcuin dies while copying what he claims will be his final work, a psalter that he says will contain the complete visual representation of divine wisdom, his techniques die with him. The monastery attempts to continue his work using conventional methods, but their manuscripts, while scholarly accurate, lack the transformative power that made Brother Alcuin's creations legendary throughout the medieval world. The night is deepest now, and we drift to the legendary workshop of Master Villard de Honnecourt, the architect whose notebooks contain designs and techniques so far ahead of their time that modern engineers still struggle to understand how they could have been conceived with medieval technology. Working in the early 13th century, Villard develops machines and construction techniques that seem to anticipate developments that won't occur for centuries. His designs include perpetual motion machines, automated figures that move without human intervention, construction devices that can lift massive stones with minimal human effort, and architectural plans that incorporate principles of engineering that won't be formally recognized until the Renaissance. But Villard's innovations go beyond mere mechanical ingenuity. His notebooks reveal an understanding of the relationship between mathematics, engineering, and spiritual principles that allows him to create designs that work not just on practical levels, but serve higher purposes related to what he calls the divine mechanics of creation. His architectural plans don't simply provide instructions for building, they incorporate symbolic and mathematical elements that he believes align physical structures with cosmic harmonies. Working with concepts that blend traditional Christian theology with ancient knowledge that he claims to have discovered in Arabic texts, Villard develops a comprehensive system of sacred technology that could have revolutionized medieval civilization. His workshop becomes a center for advanced learning, where scholars, craftsmen, and even alchemists come to study techniques that seem to bridge the gap between science and spirituality. However, Villard's knowledge proves too advanced for his time. Church authorities become suspicious of techniques that seem to border on magic, while practical craftsmen struggle to understand concepts that require mathematical knowledge beyond their training. When Villard disappears while on a journey to study Islamic architecture in Spain, some say he was captured by bandits. Others claim he was recruited by Muslim scholars who recognized his genius. His notebooks are scattered among his students and followers. Most of the techniques they contain are never implemented, while the theoretical knowledge they represent is gradually forgotten as medieval learning moves in other directions. Centuries later, when Leonardo da Vinci discovers fragments of Villard's work, he recognizes their extraordinary value, but lacks the complete context necessary to fully understand or implement the designs. The loss of Villard's complete knowledge represents one of the greatest setbacks in the history of human technological development, a reminder that genius too far ahead of its time may be lost rather than celebrated. As the abbey bells ring out across the medieval landscape, calling the faithful to their morning prayers, we encounter the final workshop of our journey, the legendary atelier where all lost knowledge is ultimately preserved. Here, in chambers that exist outside of time and space, the accumulated wisdom of every craftsman, every artisan, every master who ever worked to transform raw materials into objects of beauty and utility is maintained in forms that transcend the limitations of physical matter. The techniques that we have encountered in our journey through medieval Europe are represented here not as lost knowledge, but as seeds of understanding that will eventually flower in future ages, when humanity is ready for the responsibilities that such wisdom entails. Every vanished workshop, every forgotten technique, every innovation that died with its creator contributes to the great synthesis of human knowledge that spans all cultures and all times. In this ultimate atelier, the boundaries between different crafts dissolve, revealing the underlying unity that connects all authentic efforts to create beauty, utility, and meaning through the transformation of matter. And as the abbey bells ring out across the medieval landscape, calling the faithful to their morning prayers, we understand that all craftsmanship is ultimately spiritual practice. All technical knowledge is part of humanity's ongoing conversation with the forces that shape reality. All lost techniques are preserved in the vast workshop of human consciousness that transcends any single tradition or period. The lost craftsmen we have encountered tonight represent not endings, but transitions. Their vanished knowledge waiting for rediscovery by future generations who will have the wisdom to use such power responsibly. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that every skill you have ever developed, every technique you have ever mastered, every moment when you have successfully transformed raw materials into something more beautiful or useful connects you to the great tradition of human craftsmanship that began with the first toolmaker and will continue until the final artist puts down their instruments. The medieval world sleeps around us, its workshops silent but not empty, They're tools waiting for hands that understand not just technique, but the sacred responsibility that comes with the power to transform matter according to human vision. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the gentle rhythm of craftsmen at work, the soft glow of forges and furnaces where raw materials undergo their ancient transformations, the whisper of tools, guided by hands that have achieved perfect unity between skill and intention. In your dreams, you may find that every lost technique eventually finds its way to the right craftsman, carried not by written instructions but by the love that transforms labor into art, the dedication that makes every workshop a sacred space, the understanding that recognizes all authentic craftsmanship as participation in the ongoing creation of the world. The medieval night embraces you now, complete and eternal, where every lost craftsman becomes a teacher, every forgotten technique becomes a gift waiting to be received, every workshop that ever existed becomes part of the great atelier where all human creativity finds its source and its fulfillment. In this deepest darkness, we understand that knowledge is never truly lost, but only waits, like seeds in winter soil, for the proper season of its flowering. Sleep now in the vast workshop of dreams, where all techniques are available, all materials are workable, and all visions of beauty and utility can finally, perfectly, peacefully be realized. The Midnight Bells, a medieval mystery sleep journey. Picture yourself standing in the moonlit courtyard of an ancient monastery, where the silence of the night is broken only by the distant sound of bells that ring when they should not, calling the faithful to prayers that were never scheduled. Tonight we shall journey through the bell towers and campaniles of medieval Europe, following the mysterious sounds of bronze voices that toll at midnight without human hands to guide them, bells that ring in patterns that seem to carry messages from beyond the veil of ordinary reality, and carillons that play melodies heard by none but the sleepless and the dreaming. In this age of ordered prayer and regulated time, when the ringing of bells marked not just the hours but the very rhythm of Christian life, every peal carried sacred significance. Matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, the great wheel of prayer turned through each day, marked by bronze tongues that had been blessed by bishops and named by their creators. But sometimes, in the deep watches of the night, bells would sound that answered to no earthly schedule, following rhythms older than Christianity itself. Let us now drift through their mysterious stories, as gentle as the whisper of wind through bell towers where shadows move without bodies to cast them. Imagine yourself walking through the cobbled streets of Canterbury in the year 1171, just 1 year after the martyrdom of Thomas Becket, when the very stones seem to remember violence, and the air itself carries whispers of sanctity and political intrigue. The great cathedral bell tower looms against the starlit sky, its bells silent in accordance with the canonical hours. But as midnight approaches, something stirs in the ancient stones. Brother Simon, the monastery's bell-keeper, lies sleepless in his cell, troubled by dreams of the archbishop's murder that replay each night in vivid detail. As the cathedral clock prepares to strike the hour, he hears something that makes his blood run cold, the sound of the great bell beginning to toll, its deep bronze voice carrying across the sleeping city with a rhythm that follows no earthly pattern. 7 strokes. Pause. 3 strokes. Pause. 4 strokes. The pattern repeats night after night, and Brother Simon realizes with growing unease that the numbers correspond to the date of Becket's murder, the 7th day of the 12th month, in the 4th year of King Henry's reign. But when he climbs the tower to investigate, he finds the bell chamber empty, the great bronze bell hanging motionless while its voice continues to echo across Canterbury. Local scholars who studied the phenomenon discover that the phantom tolling occurs only when political tensions threaten the church, as if the murdered archbishop's spirit uses the bells to warn of approaching danger. The mysterious ringing continues for 7 years, always at midnight, always following the same pattern, until the Pope canonizes Becket and pilgrims begin arriving to pray at his tomb. On the night of the canonization, the bells ring out in joyous celebration. But this time, Brother Simon watches from the tower as they move by themselves, bronze mouths opening and closing in perfect rhythm while invisible hands guide their motion. The candlelight flickers in windows throughout the sleeping city as we drift to the monastery of Cluny, where the great bell tower houses what many consider the most magnificent set of bells in all of Christendom. Brother Anselm, the master bell founder who cast these bronze voices with his own hands, knows each bell's tone as intimately as a parent knows a child's cry. He named them for the archangels, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and blessed each one with holy water mixed with his own tears of devotion. But in the winter of 1247, Brother Anselm begins to notice something disturbing about his beloved bells. They ring correctly during the prescribed hours, their voices joining in the complex harmonies that mark the canonical prayers. But at midnight, when the monastery sleeps and no human hand should touch the ropes, he hears them singing together in harmonies that he never taught them, melodies that seem to come from some celestial realm beyond earthly comprehension. Night after night, he climbs the tower to investigate, but the bells fall silent at his approach, hanging motionless in their frames while the echoes of unearthly music seem to linger in the cold air. Brother Anselm begins to suspect that his bells have learned to pray by themselves, that decades of marking sacred hours have awakened some form of consciousness within the bronze itself. He starts keeping a journal of the midnight concerts, noting that the bells seem to ring in response to events happening far beyond the monastery walls, tolling mournfully on nights when distant battles claim Christian lives, ringing joyously when peace treaties are signed in foreign courts. The melodies they create become increasingly complex, incorporating musical intervals that won't be formally recognized for centuries. But Brother Anselm, rather than being frightened by the phenomenon, begins to see it as a sign of divine favor. His bells have become so sanctified through years of marking sacred time that they have transcended their earthly limitations and joined the eternal hymn of praise that the angels sing before God's throne. Feel your breathing slow as we wander to the hill towns of Tuscany, where the campanile of San Gimignano houses bells whose voices carry across valleys and vineyards to reach villages scattered throughout the countryside. Master Giovanni the bellkeeper, whose family has tended these bronze singers for 4 generations, maintains the ancient schedule of hours with religious devotion. But in the autumn of 1284, as political warfare tears through the Italian peninsula, Giovanni begins to hear his bells ringing patterns that he never taught them. At first, he assumes that political refugees hiding in the bell tower are somehow manipulating the bells to send coded messages to allies in distant towns. But his investigation reveals something far more mysterious. The bells are ringing themselves, following a complex pattern that seems to convey information about approaching armies, changing political alliances, and safe routes for travelers fleeing the violence. Giovanni realizes that his bells have somehow become part of a communication network that spans the entire region. Bronze voices calling to bronze voices across the dark Tuscan landscape. Merchants traveling at night report hearing the bells guide them away from roads where bandits wait in ambush, while pilgrims claim the midnight tolling leads them to monasteries that offer sanctuary from political persecution. The bells seem to have developed their own intelligence, using their elevated position and far-carrying voices to serve as guardians of the innocent and defenseless. But the phenomenon troubles church authorities, who worry that such supernatural activities might be the work of demonic rather than divine forces. When the Bishop of Siena arrives to investigate, he finds Giovanni maintaining his vigil in the bell tower, insisting that the bells are performing a sacred duty that transcends human understanding. The bishop orders the bells to be silenced, but on the night of his departure, they ring out more loudly than ever, their voices joined by bells from every tower in Tuscany in a chorus so magnificent that travelers report hearing it from 50 miles away. The night deepens around us like a protective cloak as we drift to the Abbey of Mont Saint-Michel, where the tides and the bells mark time, according to rhythms that seem to connect earthly concerns with cosmic forces. Brother Matthew, who serves as both tide watcher and bellkeeper, understands better than most how the monastery exists at the intersection of multiple worlds: land and sea, earth and heaven, time and eternity. The abbey's bells ring not just the canonical hours, but also warnings about tidal changes that can trap unwary pilgrims on the causeway. But Brother Matthew has begun to notice that the bells sometimes ring tidal warnings hours before the actual tide changes, as if they possess knowledge of future events. More mysteriously, they sometimes toll funeral knells for people who are still alive, only for news of those deaths to arrive days or weeks later. The bells seem to exist partially outside of normal time, their bronze voices echoing not just across space but across temporal boundaries that limit human perception. Brother Matthew starts documenting these temporal anomalies, creating a record that reveals patterns suggesting the bells can perceive events that will happen up to a month in the future. The phenomenon intensifies during certain astronomical alignments, particularly when the moon is full and the tides reach their highest points. During these times, the bells ring continuously from midnight until dawn, their voices creating harmonies that seem to open doorways to other dimensions of reality. Pilgrims who hear these midnight concerts report visions of the abbey existing simultaneously in past, present, and future, seeing ghostly figures from different centuries moving through the same spaces. Brother Matthew begins to believe that Mont Saint-Michel, built on its ancient rocky foundation and surrounded by tides that have flowed for millennia, has become a kind of temporal focal point where the bells serve as instruments for perceiving the eternal patterns that underlie the apparent chaos of historical events. As the castle bells toll across the sleeping countryside, we find ourselves in the cathedral city of Cologne, where the massive bell tower houses bronze giants whose voices can be heard for miles across the German landscape. Master Heinrich the Bellmaster, whose knowledge of campanology is legendary throughout the Holy Roman Empire, has spent his life studying not just the technical aspects of bell founding, but the spiritual properties that make certain bells seem to possess almost supernatural powers. The great bells of Cologne, Peter, Paul, Mary, and Joseph, were cast by Heinrich's grandfather using techniques that blend metallurgy with sacred geometry, creating bronze alloys that produce tones of extraordinary purity and power. But Heinrich has begun to notice that these bells sometimes ring themselves during times of great spiritual significance, marking events that no human calendar records. They toll for the deaths of saints before news of their passing reaches Cologne, ring joyously for the birth of future saints while they are still infants, and sound warnings before disasters that threaten Christian communities throughout Europe. Heinrich realizes that his bells have become prophetic instruments, their bronze voices serving as a kind of early warning system for the spiritual community of Christendom. The phenomenon seems to be connected to the specific bronze alloy used in their casting, which Heinrich's grandfather claimed was blessed by a hermit who possessed the gift of prophecy. The hermit supposedly added a small amount of metal from his own prayer bell to each casting, creating a network of connected bronze voices that share information across vast distances. Heinrich begins mapping the locations of bells that display similar prophetic properties, discovering that they form a geometric pattern across Europe that corresponds to ancient pilgrimage routes and sacred sites. The midnight ringings become more frequent and complex, with bells in different cities, coordinating their tolling to create continent-spanning melodies that convey information about everything from weather patterns to political developments. But when Heinrich attempts to share his discoveries with church authorities, he encounters resistance from officials who prefer that such supernatural phenomena remain unofficial and unexplained. The hours pass like whispered secrets as we drift to the mountain monastery of Saint Bernard de Menthon, where the bells must ring through alpine storms and avalanches to guide travelers through passes that can become deadly without warning. Brother Francis, who maintains the rescue station that saves hundreds of lives each winter, has developed an almost supernatural ability to interpret the meanings behind the monastery's bell signals. The bells ring different patterns for different types of weather danger, steady tolling for approaching storms, rapid sequences for avalanche warnings, slow rhythmic patterns to guide lost travelers towards safety. But Brother Francis has begun to notice that the bells sometimes ring warning patterns when no earthly danger is visible, only for unexpected disasters to strike hours or days later. The bells seem to sense approaching danger through means that transcend normal meteorological observation, responding to atmospheric changes that human senses cannot detect. More mysteriously, they sometimes ring welcome patterns when no pilgrims are approaching. Yet rescue parties following the sound inevitably find travelers in desperate need of help. The bells appear to be responding not just to physical presence, but to human need itself. Their bronze voices carrying across the mountains to reach anyone whose life depends on finding sanctuary. Brother Francis begins to understand that his bells have become part of the spiritual infrastructure of the Alps. Bronze guardians whose voices serve the same protective function as the monastery's famous rescue dogs. The midnight ringings intensify during the worst winter storms, when the bells ring continuously to maintain audible contact with any travelers who might be lost in the darkness. During these vigils, Brother Francis reports hearing the bells carry on conversations with each other, coordinating rescue efforts across multiple mountain passes, and sharing information about weather conditions throughout the entire Alpine region. The phenomenon suggests that the bells have developed their own form of consciousness, dedicated to the preservation of human life, their bronze voices serving as angels of mercy for anyone brave or desperate enough to cross the dangerous mountain passes. Feel your body growing heavy as we journey to the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where the great bell tower houses Emmanuel, the largest bell in France, whose voice has marked the most significant events in the nation's history. Master Robert, the cathedral's bellkeeper, treats Emmanuel not just as a musical instrument, but as a living entity whose bronze voice carries the collective memory of French Christianity. Cast from bronze that includes metal from older bells dating back to the time of Charlemagne, Emmanuel seems to contain within its metal the accumulated wisdom and experience of centuries. But Master Robert has begun to notice that Emmanuel sometimes rings itself during moments of great historical significance, its voice carrying across Paris to announce events before they officially occur. The bell tolled for the death of King Louis IX while he was still fighting in the Crusades, rang in celebration of the completion of the cathedral decades before the last stone was placed, and mourned for disasters that wouldn't happen for years to come. Master Robert realizes that Emmanuel exists partially outside of normal time, its bronze consciousness encompassing past, present, and future in ways that allow it to perceive the patterns that connect historical events. The midnight ringings become increasingly frequent as France faces political and religious challenges, with Emmanuel's voice seeming to offer guidance and comfort to anyone who understands how to interpret its messages. The bell develops what Master Robert can only describe as a personality, responding to current events with emotional tones that range from joyous celebration to profound mourning. During times of national crisis, Emmanuel rings continuous calls for prayer that seem to strengthen the faith and resolve of everyone who hears them. But the most remarkable aspect of the phenomenon is Emmanuel's apparent ability to inspire hope during the darkest periods of French history, its bronze voice carrying messages of ultimate triumph over temporary difficulties. Master Robert begins to see Emmanuel not just as a bell, but as the bronze heart of French Christianity. Its midnight tolling, serving as a constant reminder that divine providence guides the destiny of nations just as surely as it guides the lives of individuals. The Abbey bell tolls across sleeping villages as we visit the monastery of Glastonbury, where legends claim that the bells were blessed by Joseph of Arimathea himself and possess powers that connect them directly to the earliest traditions of British Christianity. Brother Arthur, named for the legendary king whose grave is said to lie beneath the abbey, maintains these ancient bronze voices with reverence for their connection to the mythical origins of Christianity in Britain. The bells of Glastonbury ring not just for canonical hours, but for events that seem to resonate with the deepest levels of British spiritual history. They toll for the deaths of kings before coronation ceremonies officially begin, ring for battles won and lost throughout the realm, and celebrate the birth of future saints while they are still taking their first breath. Brother Arthur has discovered that the bells respond particularly strongly to events involving the Grail legends that permeate Glastonbury's spiritual atmosphere, ringing elaborate welcome sequences when pilgrims arrive, who carry deep devotion to the Grail mysteries. The midnight concerts become increasingly complex as the bells seem to take on the role of guardians for the legendary treasures supposedly hidden beneath the abbey. They ring warning patterns when treasure hunters approach the sacred grounds, welcome melodies for genuine spiritual seekers, and triumphant fanfares during moments when the eternal Grail mysteries touch the temporal world in ways that only the bells can perceive. Brother Arthur begins to understand that his bells serve as bronze sentinels for secrets that are too powerful to be revealed directly, but too important to be lost entirely. The bells create a kind of protective barrier around the abbey's mysteries, their voices, ensuring that only those who approach with pure hearts and genuine spiritual purpose can access the deeper levels of Glastonbury's sacred knowledge. During the deepest part of winter nights, when the veil between worlds grows thin, the bells ring continuously from midnight until dawn, their bronze voices maintaining connection with spiritual realities that exist beyond ordinary perception. As dawn approaches but still seems far away, we find ourselves in the bell tower of the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, where the great bronze voices guide pilgrims on the final stage of their sacred journey. Master Diego, whose family has maintained these bells for generations, understands that they serve not just as markers of time, but as beacons of hope for travelers who have walked hundreds of miles to reach this sacred destination. The bells of Santiago ring not just for local events, but for the spiritual condition of pilgrims throughout Europe. Their voices somehow connected to every soul who has ever set foot on the Camino with sincere devotion. They toll mournfully for pilgrims who die en route, ring joyously for spiritual breakthroughs achieved in distant cities, and create welcome melodies that can be heard by travelers still days away from the cathedral. Master Diego has noticed that the bells ring with particular intensity during the midnight hour, when their voices seem to reach across impossible distances to offer comfort and guidance to pilgrims struggling through the darkest moments of their journeys. The phenomenon suggests that the bells have become part of the spiritual infrastructure of pilgrimage itself. Bronze guardians whose voices serve to maintain the invisible network of prayer and mutual support that sustains the thousands of souls who walk the Camino each year. The midnight concerts intensify during the major pilgrimage seasons, when the bells coordinate their voices with every other bell tower along the pilgrimage routes, creating a bronze highway of sound that spans the entire distance from the Pyrenees to the Atlantic Ocean. Pilgrims report that following the sound of bells during their darkest hours invariably leads them to shelter, food, or human companionship when they need it most. Master Diego begins to see his bells not just as musical instruments, but as angels cast in bronze, their voices serving the same protective and guiding functions that medieval theology attributes to the heavenly hosts who watch over human souls during their earthly pilgrimage toward divine union. Your breathing has found its natural rhythm now, slow and deep. As we drift to the final bell tower of our journey, the legendary campanile that exists at the intersection of all bell towers, where every bronze voice that has ever rung in service of the sacred ultimately finds its true home. Here, in chambers that exist outside of time and space, the accumulated music of centuries creates a symphony that encompasses all the prayers, all the warnings, all the celebrations that bells have ever marked throughout the history of Christianity. The midnight bells we have encountered in our journey through medieval Europe are represented here not as separate phenomena, but as individual voices in the eternal carillon that sounds continuously in the realm beyond ordinary perception. Every phantom ringing, every prophetic toll, every supernatural concert contributes to the great bronze hymn that marks not just earthly time, but the cosmic rhythms that govern the universe itself. And as the abbey bells ring out across the medieval landscape, calling the faithful to their morning prayers, we understand that all bells are ultimately one bell, all bronze voices, part of a single cosmic instrument that sounds the eternal rhythms of creation, destruction, and renewal. The midnight bells we have encountered tonight represent not supernatural aberrations, but glimpses of the eternal reality that underlies temporal existence, moments when the bronze voices transcend their earthly limitations and join the eternal music that plays behind the visible world. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that every bell you have ever heard, every bronze voice that has marked a significant moment in your life, connects you to the eternal carillon that began ringing with the first act of creation and will continue until the final silence. The medieval world sleeps around us, its bell towers silent in the ordinary sense, but eternally active in the realm where all true prayer and all authentic celebration find their ultimate meaning. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the gentle bronze voices that ring across impossible distances, the soft tolling that marks not just the passage of hours, but the eternal rhythm of the sacred in the midst of the ordinary. In your dreams, you may find that every midnight bell that ever rang without human hands was responding to your own deepest prayers, calling you home to the eternal sanctuary, where all seeking finds its rest, and all bronze voices sing together in perfect harmony. The medieval night embraces you now, complete and eternal, where every midnight bell becomes a lullaby, every phantom ringing becomes a blessing, every bronze voice that sounds in the darkness becomes part of the eternal symphony that sings the universe into being, moment by moment, note by note, prayer by prayer, until all time is gathered into the eternal now where all bells ring as one, and all voices join the endless song of praise that is the deepest reality of existence itself.